Hi, I'm Patrick Kane. I'm a triple amputee. I'm an ambassador for both Össur and the UK Sepsis Trust. I public speak and I also work for a healthcare communications agency. And welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Podcast.
Patrick, it's a real joy having you on the series as a TEDx speaker and as a man who doesn't let anything get him down and a real inspiration to me and so many others. It's a real privilege having you on the series. Let's begin with a bit of life story. So tell us about your journey. I think, am I right? You're about 23 now.
Correct.
I'd love to hear, you packed a lot in already, but how did life begin? And, let's be straight to the point. How did you become a triple amputee? What was your story? And what have been the life lessons, and who's been the inspiration to you to be the leader you are today at such an early age?
Yeah, I guess to answer that, we're going to have to go right back to the beginning. So I was born with the normal complement of limbs, but when I was 9 months old, I became rather unwell. I was, again, in the way that babies are, not very responsive, crying, very irritable. And we didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of a 3.5 month stay in hospital when I had meningococcal septicaemia. Things were very touch and go for a very long time. And there are a number of factors along the way which where I got extremely lucky. And I came out of hospital just after my first birthday, but I was missing my right leg below the knee, all the fingers on my left hand, and the second and third digits on my right hand. So that's sort of how things started. But to go on, I mean, since then, things have been quite normal for me. I learned to walk on a prosthetic leg. I went to a normal school. I always did things quite normally. And so from there, things haven't been too different. I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. Is I remember listening to one of the ladies who ended up being in charge, I think, the senior vice president for cabin crew at Emirates Airlines, and she went to work in a deaf school and in Australia, and she began to teach them differently from how they've been taught before. In that, she said, "Look, we're not going to see this as disadvantage. You're going to compete with the others." So they took on squash and also they started to win all sorts of things. But of course, the school governors got all a bit upset about this because they weren't going to then be seen as different because they were competing with the other schools on a normal basis. But I do think your attitude defines your altitude, as someone said, and the way that your mom Emma thinks about you and others think about you would surely define how you thought about yourself. Do you want to just say a bit more about how people treated you and then therefore how you thought about yourself?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As when I say things have been normal, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that I was never treated differently, and everything was expected of me as it would be for any other child. It's funny you mentioned this school. I had a similar example where the one thing I was told I wasn't allowed to do as a child was to play rugby. All of my best friends played, and I wanted nothing more than to play with them. But the school deemed it too dangerous for the other children to tackle me because of health and safety. And obviously, it's quite a strong metallic leg. And I found it made me so angry as a child because it wasn't even, I wasn't allowed to do it, it was because of them. And my solution around this was that I decided to play rugby without my leg on. Now, I really don't recommend it. I was awful. But I think it was sort of me trying to prove the point that I was going to be able to do. Whatever I wanted, really.
Yeah, well, I admire you for that. I was a really bad rugby player, even with all my limbs. So I have no excuse, but I do admire you for trying to overcome that. And as you were growing up, who were the people that you looked to as role model leaders, or not necessarily perfect in a way? None of us are. We're all work in progress, but that you took solace and encouragement and example from them. Who would you say?
It's a really good question. I think something which often surprises people. I never had many disabled heroes, for want of a better word. I never, although I took an interest in that area and prosthetics, I was never drawn to sort of role models in that way. I think I had lots of more stereotypical role models that everybody looked up to, be it athletes or sort of adventurers of old. I remember one one that I used to had an obsession with from quite a young age. Are you aware of George Mallory?
I am aware of George.
Yeah. So George Mallory, from a young age, I found a really fascinating story, and that famous quote of "Why climb Everest? Because it is there." Yeah. I remember found the thought encapsulated a lot of things that I agreed with at that age. So yeah, I would say I had slightly more normal heroes in that sense. One of my heroes absolutely growing up was a man called Dr. Parvis Habibi, who was the man responsible for saving me as a child.
All right.
But he, whilst an incredible doctor, continues to do crazy things such as swimming the Channel every summer and cycling from London to Paris with a swim in between. And I mean, not just a doctor. And so I was always inspired by these sort of Herculean efforts, but that I could relate to, but maybe not currently emulate myself. But anyway,
let's get him on this podcast series, don't you think? Is he an inspiration to you?
Yes, I mean, you couldn't pick a better example to be perfectly honest.
Well, after this, let's get you to drop him an email.
I would love that,
and invite him to be your guest on this show. That would be a nice touch.
I think it'd be perfect.
Okay. Anything else about life and growing up before we move into some of the other questions that you and I were going to chat about? But anything else any kind of key messages you'd like to get across?
Again, I think that when things changed for me would have been when I was 13 years old. So I'd never used a prosthesis on my arm before. And then at age 13, my stepfather saw an advert in a newspaper for a revolutionary bionic arm. And it sort of began the process of, we looked into it. And to cut a slightly longer story short, I became the youngest person in the world to be fitted.
That is so cool.
To be fitted with this bionic arm.
Awesome.
It's just the most incredible piece of kit.
So futuristic, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure you can hear it whirring away.
What can you do with it?
So so there are two inputs. So my arm goes till about here.
Yeah.
And there are two inputs into the arm. So there's open and close. And the way you do that is by tensing either the muscle on the top side of your forearm or on the bottom side of your forearm. So it's a very simple, almost flex of the wrist, which controls it. But then you can do different muscle patterns, so to say, to make it do different movements. So if I hold open, and then if I'm to gesture forwards, I go into a point, which might be useful for typing. Or if I go open, then gesture left, it goes into a pinch for picking up, a very fine object. And so you can do all these different grip patterns, and it allows you to do almost anything. I mean, I got this when I was 13 years old, and the same day I learned how to use it, I learned how to tie my own shoelaces and cut up my own food. So
amazing.
Yeah, it does everything, to be completely honest.
Yeah. And on your right hand, which you've lost a number of the fingers there.
Yes.
How do you manage to use it between the two of them?
So I'm actually right-handed. And I think it's because I had 13 years without using the prosthesis. So I mean, I've always been very dexterous with this. And I mean,
I can't even do that.
It's funny because it comes so naturally to me, and I think it's probably they're all the same length. So in a way they're just shorter fingers. But I would say I have above average handwriting, and so I'm right hand dominant. And if I don't wear the arm for a day for one reason or another, I'm more than capable without. But the arm was a big changing point growing up. And I mentioned, obviously, it allowed me to do individual tasks, which I previously wasn't able to. But I think there also came a change of confidence and attitude and ability with it. And people became curious in a inquisitive way rather than a sort of, oh, I wonder what happened. It became, I wonder what that is. And it really, that change in attitude to how I was perceived also obviously changed my confidence growing up. And so it was an incredibly important thing for me, and I haven't looked back.
No, and I think attitude is everything. And that famous line, does he take sugar? Well, like just because someone's sitting in a wheelchair, does he take sugar? I can speak, and talk to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that you get people sort of pity you and go, oh, are you all right? And this go, or do they talk to you normally? I mean, or is it just, it varies from person to person?
Varies a huge amount from person to person. And I think varies a lot on the circumstance that I happen to be in. If I'm fiddling with something or struggling with something, someone might, out of purely the goodwill of their heart, but try and interject to help me. And I think I've unfortunately ended up rather stubborn and wanting to prove that I'm able to do it all. So often the answer is no, but the ask is always appreciated. I think I notice a huge difference when I am wearing the arm as opposed to not, in people's attitudes. I think when I'm not, there is a lot more pity involved in the look. But also, I mean, the arm is carbon fiber, is black metallic. It's quite a cool looking thing. And I had the option of making it look flesh colored. But I personally think that the way I've chosen for it to look is also a symbol that I'm happy to talk to people. You know, this isn't trying to fit in or blend in. And so I think it is a statement to people that I'm willing to talk about it, and hopefully that's how it comes across.
Yeah, no, I mean, and very much in all our conversations today. And I think it's almost, I suppose it's a bit like diversity and inclusion. It's celebrating difference. We're not all the same. Everybody's different. With one or two of my army friends who through mines and off-route devices lost legs and arms, with their legs, they found that they tended to outgrow the prosthetic, and then had to get another one, and it can get quite expensive. Have you had to have a number of different prosthetic arms, or have you managed to keep the same one?
Yeah, so legs, obviously losing my leg at about a year old. Babies grow incredibly quickly, and so I'd probably be having about 2 legs a year until the age of 18, when things unfortunately slowed down a bit. And then arms do just grow a little bit slower than legs as well. So I'd say maybe I'd get a new arm socket every 2 years or so. But obviously things change over time, and even the change of your residual limb might change and be healthier or not. So there's a lot of variation in there. Yeah. But the good thing is that the components which don't change, such as the foot, the ankle, and the actual hand itself, you can swap out. So always slightly shocks people, this one. But if you just so you get a new one of these, but this can be transferred onto the next one. So there are ways around it.
That's great. And does it fire rockets as well? Things like that?
Not yet. I've asked for that in the next version, to be honest. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Okay, and I'm always interested in people's highs and lows in their life. So if you were to pick your most joyous and I haven't been drinking yet, I promise. Your most joyous and happy moment in your life, which would you pick? And then if there was a dark moment in your life, what would you describe, and what you learned from each of those situations?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, the standout moment for me has to be when I was 13, in 2012 rather, so 15, I was asked to carry the Olympic torch through Trafalgar Square. Cool. And I mean, it's a moment that I will never forget. I mean, just this feeling of euphoria, and very proud to be asked to do such an incredible thing in such an historic place. So that was particularly special. And actually, as I think about it, it's lurking somewhere behind me. Over in the corner there.
That is cool. That is
cool.
It's
an amazing thing.
I haven't met anybody else who's done that. That's
so that I can't look past. But and that was a culmination of lots of things, being asked to do that. I'm trying to think what I mean. There wasn't many learnings from it other than it just being the proudest day of my life. But it's one that I'll always cherish.
But stay with it, Paddy, because you say there weren't many learnings, but we all have highs and lows just day to day. And when you're down and finding things difficult, surely do you not think back to that proud moment, or even recreate it when you were doing your TED talk or speaking today, and that while you might have bad days, you were recognized there, and there were fellow amputees who were in the Olympics doing amazing things. Wasn't that something quite special? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, you're completely right. I remember feeling especially proud. I mean, even the little slogan underneath, you might have had someone else might have carried it. It might say athlete, or had their little description, and mine said an inspiration to all who know him, which I remember feeling amazed that that was the descriptor that they'd chosen for me. Which is nothing more than a really lovely thing for someone to say about you. So
I'd probably want that on my gravestone, actually.
Exactly, and if I can say where it came from as well, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
So you're right. It was an amazing moment. I mean, there was a certain irony which which we giggle about, that they chose one of the only places in the UK torch relay which had stairs for me to do, which obviously I'm absolutely fine with. But just thinking, God, another obstacle to you know, had sort of these dreams of things going horribly wrong. But thankfully, it all went well on the day.
Yeah, it wasn't like chariots of fire as you were running along.
No, exactly. I was concentrating very hard to not make that the case. I got to the top of the steps and they told me to wave. And
Yeah,
I'd previously been holding
did you unwind the arm and wave with the other hand? Ah! Oh,
yeah, exactly. This is the thing. And I remember thinking I hadn't planned on waving, and I had to very quickly work out how to not drop it in front of all these thousands of people that were there. But yeah, thankfully I pulled it off.
You pulled it off, as they say, just like you pulled your hand off. I'm very okay. Well, that's a very special moment. I haven't got a moment like that. That will stay with me. What about a dark moment and what you learned? I mean, you had a number of dark moments, but which one would you pick, and perhaps what it taught you about leadership, resilience, anything? But just tell us.
Yeah, mine's interesting because growing up, there are obviously people that might have made funny comments here or there, but I always understood that it more often than not came from a place of curiosity and not understanding, rather than a place of malice. And I think as soon as anyone got to know me, they or I was able to speak with anyone, any sort of comment was explained and understood and was no longer an issue. One moment which does stand out, though, is when I was 18 years old, I got contacted by a TV producer who was looking to, ask me to go on a TV program. And I knew something was different at the beginning when she said to me, before I tell you about the program, do you mind if I ask if you're single? And I thought it was just a slightly bizarre way to ask, start a thing. And I said, yes, I am. And she said, and how long have you been single for? I said, well, I'm 18. She said, oh, so you're new to the dating game. And I was thinking, this is going a really interesting place. Anyway, she told me all about this show and told me it was very tasteful and done really well, but it was for people in my situation. And she said, before I go into it, would you say your disability has held you back in your dating life? And I said, no, I don't actually. And she said, oh, well, we still think you'd be perfect. Anyway, she sent me through some more information about the show, but never revealed its title. I unfortunately said, I'm not interested. It wasn't going to appeal to me. Fast forward a year or so, and I was watching The Undateables on TV. And I know it's quite a controversial TV program, but I actually think it's shot rather well. I think society has deemed these people undateable, and the show actually goes a really long way to proving that they're not. So I was curious to see if it was that TV program. I looked into it, and it wasn't. Unfortunately, the TV program which I was asked to go on was called Too Ugly for Love, with a question mark at the end of it. And there's no spin on a TV program with that sort of name. And I remember thinking, I'm lucky that I've always been quite confident, but I remember thinking how awful that they're targeting people who they're assuming, rightly or wrongly, that are low on confidence. Yeah. And it just seemed like quite a humiliating way of phrasing something which didn't need to be done. And I guess they needed a catchy name to entice people in, but just thought it was didn't have any good intentions behind it. And I think that definitely put some pressure on me, later on to kind of, should I never saw my disability that way, but should I, and is it going to cause me problems? And fortunately it hasn't, but I that was from a place where I was coming from a really good place. And you can imagine that if you're asking someone who's in a bad place, it could have some really horrible repercussions. And it went on for multiple seasons, that show. So just goes to, I think what shocked me was that I'd always found I could sort of correct the individual and educate and help to teach. But if a show like that's going out on TV, unfortunately, it just goes to show that society as a whole might not necessarily be as accepting as I previously thought, and it opened me up to a lot.
I'm afraid it's a sign of a very sick society. If that's what reality TV shows become like, and if Donald Trump becomes president and has no experience of politics, but he's a reality TV show and a wrestler, I mean, it's just ludicrous. So let's go on to, since we're talking about Donald Trump and TV producers who have no morals and ethics, let's talk about MQ on the 8 elements of the Inspiring Leadership Compass. really interested in the first one, which is sort of your morals, your values, your integrity, what you will do, what you won't do, and what's happened for you when you let it slip a bit and you didn't keep to the values that you espouse. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I found this really, I've really enjoyed reading the answers, to be honest. I think for me, the more I thought about it, I feel like I'm quite strongly opinionated about lots of things and quite moral with my stance on lots of things, but I couldn't quite work out how to sort of distill it down into something a bit more tangible other than just thinking lots about things. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually the most important thing for me is to be the best version of myself, right? And that sounds very simple, but it essentially means that I'm trying to avoid being anyone else and being authentic to myself. And it's funny because you mentioned, what do you learn when you let them slip? Well, it's quite an easy one to learn from because I'm only competing against myself in that sense. So it's not, you can't beat yourself, up with it and say, I have to be perfect, I have to be this. But as long as you continue to pursue those things which you know yourself, and be that your attitude towards something or your response to something, or even on the more day-to-day, your commitment to responsibility, and it could be anything. It means that you don't need to, or you only need to put the pressure internally. So I make a lot of mistakes, and I'd be the first person to admit that. But as long as the effort continues to be applied in that positive direction, you can't go wrong with it, which is quite an odd way to phrase it. And it's not trying to be too lenient either. But I feel the drive in that sense.
Yeah. And I must say, I've got, 4 children of my own age, 25 to 29, and, met lots of their friends and things. But I do find that at the age of 23, you are mature beyond your age by a considerable amount, and just a very worldly view of life. There's no response to that. I just want to acknowledge it. PQ is the next one, meaning and purpose. What gives your life meaning and purpose? Why do you do what you do? What's your, most people haven't got a clue. I know some people who are in their 50s and they still haven't got a work. I'm not sure what I'm going to do when I grow up. But what gives your life at this early stage in your life? What gives it meaning and purpose? And what do you see as, why were you put on the planet? Mark Twain said the 2 most important days in your life, the day you were born and the day you found out why. Have you found out why yet? Or are you still searching for meaning and purpose in your life?
I'd say somewhere between the two, to be honest. I've always been aware how lucky I am to have survived what I did as a baby. And I've always felt, I think they call it survivor's obligation, to this sense that I should do everything I can as an act of gratitude and respect. And, I've been lucky, but others, many, many more were not. So that has always been the why behind lots of things, but the actual tangible proof of that, I think, is still coming. So I've done a variety of things. I've thoroughly enjoyed public speaking. I'm an ambassador for the UK Sepsis Trust, and everything I try and do in those senses is to help repay that favor. But at the same time, I think there's more ways to do it, and I will hopefully continue to repay that favor. But I wouldn't say it's ever going to be in one specific way. No. And so even in my professional life, so I only graduated from university last year. I began my first class of 2020.
What did you read?
I studied biochemistry. And
wow.
So that came from my fascination of healthcare and science. And I was aware that I might not, I think I can be anything, but a doctor might have been a push. But, moving forwards, I wanted to, help others save lives. And so in health, I now work in healthcare communications. So, working on bringing solutions to patients. And so that's another aspect. It might be extremely different from the public speaking and the ambassador work, but it's all geared towards a big thank you, essentially.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the doctor who you described as who saved your life. Talk a little bit about him just for a moment.
Yeah, Parvis, I'm fortunate enough to say we're still very good friends. And when I was, well, I guess when I was ill as a baby, I was rushed into hospital and they weren't quite sure what. Another act of good fortune that was that I lived in London at the time, and St Mary's Hospital in Paddington was not too far away. He was just clocking off a long shift and saw me arriving in and immediately clocked back in. And I think, you know, it was, if it wasn't for him and the sort of expertise of his team as well, and the amazing nurses and other doctors, I simply wouldn't have made it. But Parvis, so he founded the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at St Mary's Hospital. And so I couldn't have got ill in a better place. It was, you know, in 1998 when this would have been one of the best places in the world to be ill as such a sick child. But also I think it cared it in quite a holistic way, because it spent a lot of time speaking with my family about what I was going through, and, you know, now is able to provide parents to be in accommodation, to be near their children. And I mean, my mother at the time slept on the floor of the hospital, but you know, it really understood that the needs of a sick child goes way beyond just the child in the way that maybe in a older intensive care unit it would do. So he's just remarkable, and he continues to raise money for, so Cosmic is the name of the charity, Children of St Mary's Intensive Care. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to be a crew member actually on his 4-person 2-way relay of the channel. So it was a 25-hour swim, 4 of them. You swim for an hour and then you get 3 hours out, and they completed it in about 25 hours, which is good going. And I mean, this is all, Parvis is in his mid-60s, I'd say now. So, I mean, it's remarkable how much he keeps doing it. And then he did a 1-man 2-way version of the channel. Sorry, 2 people 1-way. And then I think a couple summers ago did the 1-person 1-way swim. So it's just remarkable the way he continues to help others.
2 thoughts come to mind. Firstly, what an amazing guy. We had, if you listen to one of the earlier podcasts, there's a guy who did the arc to arc, where he left Marble Arch, it says arch to arc, and he ran all the way to Dover. Then he swam the channel, and then he cycled all the way to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Wow. Just phenomenal guy, definitely worth listening to that. And then the second one, you brought something quite personal to me, in that you talked about how lucky you were to be close to St Mary's, and if Parvis had not been there, maybe you wouldn't have lived, and his team. Back on the 14th of January, my brother, someone tried to murder him and burn down his family and his house. And he was taken to Queen's Medical Center, which has the best trauma unit in the country. And had he not been taken there, he probably would be dead now. He's still fighting for his life to get better. But I just say, sometimes you're very lucky that where you happen to be in the right place at the right time, even though the wrong thing has happened to you, like you were close to death with sepsis, and he'd just been stabbed by someone trying to kill him. I think just sometimes in life, you don't know how lucky you are when you think you've actually been really unlucky. But it, as you said, you lived, and other small babies with sepsis didn't live. So
exactly. And even to take it, you know, one step further, the morning started because my, by her own admission, paranoid mother, you know, I was unwell. She took me to the GP. The GP said there was nothing wrong with me, and my mother wasn't happy with that. As you know, she just knew that there was something up, and at the same time, she knew that I wouldn't be seeing the GP for long. So she asked the taxi to wait outside. And the tightness of the timings meant that if we had to call another taxi, things wouldn't have worked out either. So there are all these happy accidents along the way, which meant that I survived. And I think that's why there are some things which were in their control, but there are all these happy accidents on the way. So I think being aware of the luck involved is quite humbling, and you can't take credit for, you know, as a young baby, I mean, I was just ill in hospital, but there were these incredible professionals and happy accidents along the way, which meant that things worked out one way. So it's not any of it's on me, essentially.
Sometimes, but isn't it great that you've got very fine medical professionals like that? And I'm very grateful to the medical professionals at Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, saved my brother's life. Health quotient. Well, we're talking about health. Why not talk about mental and physical health and well-being? How do you keep yourself healthy physically and mentally? And what have you done when you let your health slip, both mentally or physically? Because you handle it incredibly well, but there'll be times when your mental health might be affected, or there'll be times when your physical health might be affected because of your triple amputee situation.
Yeah. Mentally healthy, I think I've been extremely fortunate in that that's always been, I've been, healthy there. I have an incredible group of family and friends who I've always been confident enough to turn to, and they always listened with open ears. So that's been a main factor in that for me. But I think that physically has been something which is I've been learning a lot about as I've got older. And I think the thing that I've learned recently, which might sound surprising, but my version of healthy is going to look very different for the rest for my life to other people's. I will not be running marathons, I don't think. And there will be things which I'm not able to do. But that being said, that does not mean that you write off physical health at all. And there is lots that can be done. Over the first lockdown, I got quite into my running for the first time in my life, and I was running 5K, which, if you asked me probably a year before, I wouldn't have thought I would have wanted to do, let alone could be. And then even there are smaller things. Physiotherapy, I've had a really complicated relationship with. I was told I should do it after a few injuries when I was younger, but it's these menial tasks of lifting something very light up repeatedly, or these stretches, which I kind of saw as giving in and as admitting that there was something wrong, and I don't do physio, so I'm perfectly healthy. Actually, as I've got older, I've realized that what a ridiculous thing to be stubborn about, but also there's a real value in doing the small and routine, and making that every day will have, I might be fortunate enough that I might not feel like I need to do the physio now, but in 10, 20, 30 years, I'll hopefully be thanking myself that I have done. So that's something which has probably come in the last couple of years, as opposed to my teenage years when I was a bit more defiant about, or I was almost proud that I hadn't had to do physio. And then, your back starts to hurt, or your knees, or my knee dislocates, and you think, hang on, is that that's a symptom of something, right? Yeah. So, and it's been, I have a very active group of close friends around me. And so I used to put distance, saying, I might not be in the first team, so I don't need to worry about X, Y, and Z. But actually learning that my version of healthy, whilst different, is as important and needs as much attention, I would say. Yeah,
no, and you make me think of an excellent book I read by Maria Borelius, and it's called The Health Revolution. I recommend it to you. I'm dyslexic, so I listen to lots of audiobooks. But the Health Revolution, really the research on lots of different ways of getting fit and keeping well, is that they're thinking more now about an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. Not just in food, but in exercise and in sleep and things like that. And stress is inflammatory, and lack of sleep is inflammatory. And of course, my big thing has been doing mountain marathons, crazy though it sounds. And I'm proud of the things I've achieved with those things, and endurance distance and airborne stuff. But what is coming out even in the military is they're saying, when you get to my age, approaching 60, that you avoid inflammatory things, or what they call junk miles.
Yeah.
So 5K is fine, but really anything longer than that, which I've done a lot of over the years, it is actually very inflammatory for the body, and it takes the body a long time to recover from it. So I recommend it. The book's called Health Revolution. And it's well worth listening to. She went and tried all sorts of different approaches, a bit like sort of eat, love, pray. She experimented with these different things. But the bottom line that I took from it is that find a lifestyle and a living and a food that is, anti-inflammatory means antioxidants, against free radicals, but it's a whole lifestyle approach, a mental approach.
Of course.
IQ is the next part of the Inspiring Leadership Compass. And it's not just about IQ tests. That's not what it's about at all. It's really more wisdom and judgment and decision making. Do you have some good wisdom you live by, and who helps you when you have to go through decision making? If you have your real or your virtual sort of group of advisors, who are they, and how do they help?
Yeah, I think in terms of wisdom, I've always been, not sure if taught's the right word, but I've always known from a young age that what's happened to you is not that important, and the most important thing is always how you respond to it. And when it comes to decision making, then it's almost quite easy, because you accept the things, you know, which you have zero control over, and afterwards you then go, okay, well, X has happened and X is awful. What am I going to do now? And I do find myself saying, what am I going to do about it, an awful lot with any sort of decision or query, really. And then I guess when it comes to people that I turn to, again, I have an amazing family, but I went to the same school from the age of 4 to 18. And all of my best friends I've known for now 16 odd years. And I think when you have that sort of long-term relationship with people and you know them inside and out, and I definitely consult them on anything from the gigantic to the tiny. And I think that a lot of people who, well, I'm aware how fortunate I am to have that kind of network around me. And I see other people who simply don't, and they kind of, when we've spoken about it, are very aware, pointed out to me saying, God, if only, you know, you have these people that you speak with on a daily or weekly basis who are able to give you so much value. And I could turn to some of them, not for everything, but, you know, different people for different pearls of wisdom. So it's a broad group.
But I think that's a reflection on you and your attitude. So a number of people I know, maybe in difficult circumstances, and they're always, I don't know, grumpy or feeling resentful, or life hasn't been fair to them. But you haven't got that attitude at all. You have a lot of humility and humanity, and a good bit of humor. You can laugh at yourself and with yourself. I think that makes a huge difference. Some people, when they have a different situation, they think, what would, in my case, I think, what would my father, Paul, who's been long killed, when I was 3, he was killed. You know, what would my father do in this situation? And that's often been because he's a very fine man and saved 2 people's lives, which meant he died, but they lived. And I just sort of think, what would he do? And some people have WWJD. Do you come across WWJD?
No, I can take a guess at the J, but yeah, Jesus. I mean,
what would Jesus do? Now, I have an upbringing, a faith upbringing, but it's just thinking of someone who you respect and what would they do in the circumstances. So I think that's quite interesting, and I do love your, what I would call a Stoic philosophy that you've got, which is it's not the fact that you have a problem, it's how you respond to it. So, for example, in the case of my brother, I can't help whether he lives or is very badly recovering. But what I can help is support his family and how I think about things and how I respond to the situation. So you've taken what I call a Stoic philosophy approach. I don't know whether you know that, but there's a very good book, a favorite of mine, The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, with some great bits of wisdom. Do you realize that you've taken that kind of approach?
I wouldn't say I have, no. But I'd be very curious to find out more, because maybe it would fill in any of the blanks.
I think it would. And it would also help you further as you come across whatever obstacles life throws in your way. He's done a number of books. One is called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, like the summer holiday. But my favorite, every morning I listen to, the first thing, I never listen to the news. I always listen to that day's audio of the Daily Stoic about,
sounds amazing.
You between stimulus and response, you have a choice. Stimulus, you can't, it's just happened. An event has happened. Events aren't either good or bad, but your attitude about them and your thoughts about them make them so. An event is neutral. It's an event, it's happened. Exactly. A hurricane is a hurricane. But whether you think that that's the worst thing that's ever happened to your life and you've lost your house, or that, you know what, thank God I'm alive. and I will rebuild and we'll find a way. And you have for me, a very inspiring attitude, I must say. And thank you.
What's been a little interesting recently has been there are some problems which there aren't, with the response of okay, well, what am I going to do about it? When you reach a problem and the answer is there's nothing you can do, and it doesn't need to be a big thing or a small thing, but that's actually quite a satisfying point to reach as well, because once you get to that, you go, okay, that's it then, I guess. And so that's I've always found that a very nice place to reach, almost, because if there's something you can do, you do it, and if there isn't, well, what good is there dwelling on it?
Correct. And it's like controlling the controllables, and the uncontrollables, let it go. And also in some ways non-attachment. Like a person had this view in the Stoic philosophy that he had a beautiful vase that everybody admired, and it was very expensive, cost a lot of money, but he would always describe it as the vase is broken. And they go, no, it's not. And then one day, some months later, a friend picks it up and says, it's beautiful, and it slipped from their fingers and smashed all over the floor. Oh, I'm so sorry. He says, don't worry, the vase was broken anyway. And just this attitude that it's just stuff, it's things, and really relationships and friendships are really what matters. And when my late mother-in-law unfortunately went for a cancer visit to the oncology department in Nottingham, I chatted to three people there, an 18-year-old, a 35-year-old, and a 68-year-old. And their views was very simple. They said, if anybody wants a message of what matters, it's not about the stuff we've owned, or even the things we've done or we can boast about, but it's about our friendships, and it's about family and the close ones to you. And people only realize that when their life is ebbing away and we've got weeks to live, and those things matter. Which brings me on to the next topic, which is EQ, emotional and social intelligence, oft underrated by academic institutions who go just for the IQ. But you've learned a good amount of EQ. I can tell already. It's been wonderful. The rapport skills you have are impressive for someone at 23. Many of them don't get it by the time they're 63, or some, like Trump, never get it at 73. No. But what have you done to develop and build your skills of rapport, listening, influence, emotional and social intelligence?
I think a lot of it has almost been forced upon me due to my disability. So from a young age, I became very used to being asked questions, and probably quite personal questions, by people who might not know me very well. And I think that when you get used to that quite early on, it does build, it is something that you work on over time. And the fact that I had to, a question that people will ask me, be it as soon as they've met me or later on, what happened to you? And you almost have to give them quite a long story. And for some people, it's quite an emotional story. I'm sure, I don't remember being ill as a baby, but I'm sure that for my family, delving into that every time that someone sees you can be quite a tough thing. And so I think that's built a huge amount of, I think it's helped me build rapport with people. And the fact that I'm so willing to share quite a personal thing about myself off the bat as soon as I meet people, probably allows them to do the same in return. And as a result, I form good relationships with people. And so I'd say that's been quite a lot of it. Something I'm still working on is definitely sort of the listening side of things. I think that I've got quite a stark sense of humor. And I think often something I've had to learn really is that not everyone necessarily responds in the same way about things. So a joke for me about my disability, would go down incredibly with good friends, but also realizing that being so sort of upfront and direct with some things, it doesn't work with everyone, and I think learning that, tailoring situations is really important. So I'm definitely still working on those areas, but I would say a lot of it has been drilled into me from a young age.
Yeah. And your mother, Emma, she has a good level of emotional and social intelligence too. And then resilience, people would go, well, what Patrick's been through, he must be immensely resilient. How have you learnt about resilience? And when you've had setbacks and disappointments and fallen and stumbled physically or mentally, how have you picked yourself back up again?
Yeah, it's really good because I think people compare. Obviously, you constantly make comparisons about your situation to others, and I think that can actually be quite a damaging thing to do, because you either think everyone's got it better, everyone's got it worse, and it often reflects the situation you see yourself in rather than the actuality of where you are. But I do definitely think often that things could always be worse, and I do find that's worse personally rather than worse by looking at someone else to make myself feel better. There's quite an interesting, it's a little bit of a tangent, but there's an interesting area of public speaking which I'm particularly against, and it's referred to as inspiration porn. And the idea is that you have a disabled person, usually quite severely disabled, and people cry in the audience and they say, "What an incredible speaker!" But they only really do it because it makes you feel good about what you can kind of pity this person in such a public way that's what makes you feel good about yourself. This sort of what you would describe as severely bad person saying things get better. And so I've always tried to veer into the complete opposite direction. And so the resilience isn't about comparing myself to, say, someone who's also missing an extra limb, because that just makes someone who's missing the fourth one even worse. But actually, it's kind of comparing where you are now to previous situations that you might have been through, and it's learning maybe how you thought then and what you've now learnt. So I find myself continually thinking, God, I wish I knew this before, or using what I now know to sort of hopefully avoid future things happening. And so by that, you don't sort of put others down with your new confidence, and actually you hopefully build yourself up, which I think is quite an important distinction to make.
Yeah. And in fact, I was interested what bit of advice now you'd give to your, 13-year-old self, knowing what you know now. What bit of wisdom would you share with your younger self at that crucial stage of your life?
I think I've learned, it almost seems like a counterintuitive piece of advice, because I do really enjoy testing myself and pushing those boundaries. But I also think that I've had to learn that no one can do everything, and I am especially in that bracket. So I mean, the rugby example that I said earlier is a fun example of trying to prove a teacher wrong, but the reason that you want to do things is as important. And so if I was doing it because I wanted to push myself, that's incredibly important. But actually saying no, that I don't have to prove that I can do everything, is such a valuable thing for me to learn, because I will be proved wrong. And if I spend my whole life going, God, I wish I was better at juggling, or like we're talking like really trivial skills, but things that I just physically won't be able to do, I'll end up feeling defeated and focus on the negatives. So learning as I've got older that I don't have to do absolutely everything, and if someone says I can't do something, it could be a valuable challenge and a valuable opportunity, but at the same time, it might be actually quite a wise piece of advice.
Yes.
Is quite an interesting one, and I wouldn't want to sort of set it in stone, because the motivational speaker who says you can't do everything is not a very good speaker. But there is definitely some value in that to my younger, probably hyper ambitious is the wrong word, but I was pursuing things which probably I was better off not.
Yeah, I think it is a sound bit of wisdom, and my own experience and that of others, leaders that I coach and work with, is that you can achieve amazing amount of things. That old saying, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. However, there is a bit of wisdom not to push yourself too hard. There's a thing called goal obsession. And Maria Santois was one of about 3 female mountain guides out of the whole world, of these specially trained mountain guides. And she'd often turn back from a summit ascent in appalling weather and say to her paying client, "We're not going to the summit." And they go, "Oh, well, I paid you to get me to the summit." And someone would pass them going to the summit, and she'd say, "I don't think you should go to the summit. The weather is getting really bad. It's dangerous. You should not go." No, we're going. And they die. But she saved her client, who was disappointed, but only knew later on when the other people they passed who were going for the summit died. And so there's a fine line on being driven for a goal, but not being obsessed to the point where you lose family, friends, or even your own life. And often people are so obsessed by things, they don't have car crashes themselves, but they see lots of car crashes around them and they never realize it's anything to do with them.
I completely agree. So you're right. It is a definite balance, and it's an art to perfecting that balance. But it's something that obviously is a skill that you try and build on and work on, and hopefully I'll continue to do so.
Well, I get the sense you will, which just takes me to the next one: brand, reputation, image, impact, BQ, as you call it. What have you learned from any feedback you've got from people, and what do you do to have a sort of an attitude of what Carol Dweck would call a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, and being prepared to be always work in progress?
Yeah, I think that as a public, I think a lot of my sort of learning in that aspect has come from my public speaking, and it's been a really interesting journey how I've changed what I've spoken about and how I've learned what people necessarily enjoy and don't enjoy. So I think my earlier speeches were a monologue about what I'd been through, and I started to very quickly realize how that wasn't very useful at all for anyone. And it was more important to tailor and learn that, or teach rather, might be what I've been through, but this is the end result and this is what you can learn from it. So no one is that interested in my story on its own, but it's the learnings and the teachings that come with it, which are as important. Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples, to be completely honest.
That's a good enough one, I think. And I would agree with you. You need people to go, me too. That relates. I can see how I can take something from what Patrick's been through and apply that to my own life. So time is coming to an end. Just the last 2 or 3 questions. Legacy. You're early in your life, but what would you like to be your legacy during your lifetime of the difference that you've made to other people or the kind of work you've done? What would you like your legacy to be, personally and work-wise? Yeah,
I think start with work-wise, because it's an interesting one, because I'm so early on in it. I started my first job in August. I really hope that I stay close to the goal of repaying the scientific community for how much it's done for me. So be that helping with the advanced prostheses that I wear, but also I'm in a healthcare communications agency now, and it's helping to show the value of what science and technology can do to transform lives. Technology I've always been fascinated with because it has the power to transform, the same way that this is an incredible piece of technology which allowed me to cut up my food and tie my shoelaces. That was one thing, but the most valuable thing that this has done is the change of mindset that comes with it and the possibilities that the physical has allowed. So that's been something really interesting, and I think that if I can stay close to that goal of in some way helping science and technology and how it affects people's lives, I'll be very happy. But it could be in lots of different ways, to be honest. Yeah. And I think that in my personal life, I'd probably say, I mentioned it earlier, but I've always felt like I want to give back to the community to which I owe so much. And so I would like the idea that if I can help more people, and be them disabled or not, to sort of realize what is possible, then I will have done a good job. But we'll see how that manifests itself. Well, I think you will have impressed a lot of people, and just a lot of lessons taken from this. I mean, it's going to be listened in 50 different countries by a whole range of people on 10 different podcasts, and from YouTube to LinkedIn and on my website. So they'll learn from this, I'm sure of that. And final 2 questions. Book. If you were to share a book that you've enjoyed recently and what you learned from it. Yeah, I read a great book recently, and it was as a result of a TED Talk that I'd seen. It's by someone called Josh Foer, Foer, and it's called Moonwalking with Einstein. And it is the account of a journalist who covered a memory competition in America. But he said, unfortunately, trying to cover a memory competition is one of those pathologically boring things you can cover, because you're watching people read phone books. And so he decided to, in order to get an interesting story, he would try and compete in this competition. So much in how the TV program in Sherlock, he has his mind palace. It talks about the power of different memory techniques. And I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm trying to get better and better at it. But it also speaks a lot to the way that our brains work. And I think people nowadays are very accepting of, oh, I'm very forgetful, or so-and-so has a very good memory. But actually, it's something that used to be worked on and trained the same way that a muscle would, and actually still can be. So, I mean, again, I haven't mastered it yet, but the book goes a long way to teaching you how to sort of memorize phone numbers and shopping lists and decks of cards. But I enjoyed it so much because I think it showed you the value of what might seem impossible, like trying to memorize a deck of cards, actually through some quite simple training, you can do relatively easily. So I enjoyed that, and hopefully I'll be memorizing phone books in no time at all.
I'll ring you up when I forgot my phone number.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it was a fantastic read, purely because it teaches you what can be possible after quite a simple change in attitude as well. So
yeah. Good. And we're going to end with, if you just do like you did at the beginning, with an introduction of who you are and what you do, with your final top tip. So over to you, Patrick.
Hi there. My name is Patrick Kane. I'm a triple amputee. I'm an ambassador for Össur, the UK Sepsis Trust. I'm also a public speaker, and at the same time, I currently work for a healthcare communications agency. My top tip would be that opportunity is how you perceive your current situation. Most people, when they hear that I'm a triple amputee, would probably think that that wouldn't have given me many opportunities in my life. But actually, as I've got older, it's been one of the better things that has happened to me, and I wouldn't change it at all. Because of what happened to me when I was ill as a baby, I have done incredible things such as carry the Olympic torch through Trafalgar Square, appear in an Apple advert, and speak at TEDx Teen. None of these things would have been possible, not only without what happened to me, but also with how mindset viewed this situation. And that really goes to show that opportunity is how you perceive your current situation.
Patrick, thanks. It's been great having you on the series. Really enjoyed it. And I look forward to staying in touch over the years. So thank you.
Me too. Look forward to being in touch. Thank you very much for having me.